The newsroom had seen its share of deadlines, but this one came from beyond the grave. When two men face the ghosts of their past in a crumbling office, they discover some stories refuse to end. Some cracks can never be mended. Welcome to The Last Deadline. The doorway to the old Globe newsroom stood like the mouth of a crypt, swallowing Reggie in shadows as he stepped inside. The air hit him first stale, heavy, and carrying the faint scent of mold, ink, and the acrid tang of cigarette smoke that seemed ingrained into the very walls. It had been a year, but the room greeted him like a ghost clinging to his back. Nothing much had changed, but everything felt wrong. The green-shaded lamps cast pools of jaundiced light on the cigarette-charred desks, their glow just bright enough to hint at the deeper darkness clinging to the corners of the room. A new teletype machine ticked away in the corner, its metallic clatter unnervingly precise, like a clock counting down to something inevitable. Overhead, the infamous crack in the ceiling loomed like a scary reminder of Bart Davis, whose death on a fire story was whispered about in the newsroom like a cursed legend. Reggie's eyes swept the room, lingering on every detail as if each carried a hidden threat. There was Clem at the night desk, looking just the same, but somehow more hollow. His thinning gray hair seemed paler under the lights, and his jowls hung heavier, like a man weighed down by more than time. Clem looked up as Reggie approached, his voice breaking the suffocating silence. "Hello, Reggie," Clem said, his voice gravelly worn. "It's been a long time," Reggie replied, his tone just as strained. "It has," at that. The silence stretched, taut and uneasy, between them. Reggie shifted, the creak of his shoes startlingly loud against the quiet hum of the teletype. Overhead, the faintest draft stirred the haze of smoke, twisting it into serpentine shapes that danced mockingly in the lamp's sickly glow. He forced himself to look at Clem again. They had made this pact a year ago, but standing here now, it felt like stepping into a grave. The weight of the past year bore down on him, memories pressing against his ribs, like the chill of a too-cold wind. Clem broke the silence first. "We were fools, Reggie," Clem muttered, his gaze fixed on the crack in the ceiling, as if it might answer for them both. Reggie swallowed hard. "I'll say. We should never have let her jam our lives up that way," Clem continued, his voice quieter now, as if afraid to awaken something lurking in the room. "Women are poison to good newspapermen," Reggie said, though his voice faltered, the bravado ringing hollow. It was there now, an unspoken presence between them, the weight of what they had done, of what had happened a year ago. The shadows in the room seemed to thicken, pressing closer, and the teletype's relentless clicking became almost deafening, a metallic heartbeat pounding in Reggie's ears. He glanced over at Red, who was still hunched over the phone, oblivious to the tension knotting the room. Funny thing, Reggie thought, but it was getting colder. His breath fogged in front of him, a faint puff of white against the stale haze. Red, coatless, didn't seem to notice. But Clem noticed, he always did. His eyes flicked to Reggie, sharp and knowing, before darting back to the ceiling. "We should have found some other way out," Clem said, almost to himself. Reggie's chest tightened. "You know, I felt that way too, at the last minute, when it was too late." "Yes," Clem said, barely above a whisper. "I know." The room seemed to hold its breath, the shadows pressing closer, as if eager to eavesdrop. Reggie shivered. Something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. The newsroom had always been alive with noise and movement, but tonight it felt like a mausoleum, every creak of the floorboards a death knell. Above them, the crack in the ceiling seemed wider, jagged edges reaching out like skeletal fingers. Reggie's gaze lingered on it, unease curling in his stomach. He could almost hear Bart Davis's voice, feel the weight of his absence, as if the man himself was still watching, waiting. The teletype machine faltered, its rhythm breaking for the first time, and the sound sliced through the silence like a scream. Red looked up, frowning, but Clem didn't react. His gaze was fixed on the crack, his expression unreadable. "They never fixed it," Clem murmured, his voice barely audible. "You know why." Reggie nodded, though the chill racing down his spine made him want to look away. Everyone knew why. Everyone knew about the plaster that had fallen on Bart's head, how he had died the very next day, his story unfinished. But tonight, it felt different, as if the crack wasn't just a crack, as if it was something more, something alive, something waiting. Clem turned to Reggie, his face pale, his eyes hollow. "Do you hear it?" he asked. Reggie froze. "Hear what?" Clem didn't answer. The teletype machine stuttered again, its mechanical voice warping into something that sounded almost human. A low, guttural sound echoed through the room, and Reggie's breath caught. The newsroom seemed to shift, the walls closing in, the shadows growing deeper. And then, the crack in the ceiling moved. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. But as Reggie stared, rooted to the spot, the jagged edges twisted, widening into a gaping maw. Something dark and formless seeped out, a shadow darker than the room itself. And Reggie knew they were not alone. In the heart of a crumbling newsroom, where the past is a shadow that never leaves, two men uncover a secret buried beneath the ceiling, a secret that doesn't want to stay hidden. Welcome to the last deadline. No minutes or seconds existed in this moment, just Reggie, waiting for Clem, his friend, to say something that might anchor him in the whirlwind of doubt and regret. "It wasn't really your fault, Reggie," Clem finally said, his voice a low rasp. "She was a wild one and I was a fool. None like an old one, they tell me." His laugh startled Reggie. It wasn't the boisterous laugh he remembered, the one that used to echo across the newsroom. Instead, it was thin, brittle, like the whisper of wind through the broken slats of a fire escape. "Don't blame her too much," Reggie said, his voice distant. "A couple of years before she met you, she and I were pretty close. Came a time when I couldn't forget it, and neither could she." His words felt foreign, as if they came from somewhere outside himself, drifting on the stale air of the room. The clatter of the teletype seemed louder now, every click and hum grating on his nerves. His thoughts scattered like leaves in a bitter wind, impossible to gather. He wandered to the machine, pulled a strip of paper, and scanned the headlines. "Famous actress gets fourth divorce. Senator promises lower taxes. Bride and groom killed in triple crash." It was all meaningless. A dream world of fleeting tragedies and empty promises. Only he and Clement, their problem, felt real. "And I was too old anyway. Must have been crazy," Clem was saying, his voice cutting through the haze in Reggie's mind. "You two kids, I loved you both. Should have just backed out, let you have her. But no, I had to marry her. Me, Clem Roberts, trying to play house when my real home's always been behind this desk." He gestured at the battered wood as though it were his altar. "Thank God there were no kids. What's she doing now, Reggie?" "I don't know," Reggie replied. He didn't care, and the cold hollowness of the thought startled him. Don't care either, huh, kid? Clem's smile was almost genuine now, though his face remained pale, drawn. Neither do I. It's you and me from now on. That was it. The moment Reggie had been waiting for, the reassurance that they were still them, still friends, still partners in the strange, dark theater of their lives. But now that it had come, it felt hollow, meaningless. What was left for them now? You figure it out, Clem, Reggie said, his voice heavy. Where do we go from here? Clem leaned back, his face darkening with thought. Now you're talking sense, boy. We'll go on as usual. Pick up where we left off. Things will be different, don't kid yourself on that, but we've still got more sense than we used to. And that's that. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen as Clem spoke, the jaundiced light of the green-shaded lamps flickering faintly. Overhead, the crack in the ceiling stretched wider, its edges curling like a wound reopening. The room felt alive, pulsing with a quiet menace. Clem pulled out his heavy antique watch, the chain rattling faintly. Time to get back to work. His voice carried an edge of finality. He reached for the phone, barking into it with a voice that seemed not entirely his own. Shoot me up, a morning final. Red Mackenzie paused, turning to Clem with a startled expression, then quickly looked away, his face pale. Reggie frowned, uneasy. The room felt colder again, the kind of chill that clings to graveyards. A boy entered, tossing a paper onto the desk before retreating without a word. Clem grabbed it and flipped to page 3, his movements deliberate, almost mechanical. You didn't make the front page, Reggie, Clem said, his voice laced with something Reggie couldn't quite place. Bad luck to the end. Reggie leaned closer, his fists braced against the desk, his breath frosting faintly in the dim light. Clem's words hung in the air, heavy, as he gestured to the half-column headline. Reggie's sleeve slipped back, exposing a dark burn on his forearm. Bad burn you've got there, Clem noted, his tone unnervingly calm. Doesn't hurt anymore, Reggie replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Together, they read the headline. Pays with life for crime on murder anniversary. Ossining, New York, the 26th of July. At 2 minutes past midnight tonight, Reginald J. Fallon, New York Globe reporter went calmly to the electric chair for the murder by shooting, a year ago today, of his city editor, Clement J. Roberts of White Plains, New York. Witnesses marveled at the composure of the condemned man, who seemed to welcome. Reggie's chest tightened, his breath caught. The words blurred as a wave of cold swept over him, deeper than any winter wind. He turned to Clem, whose gaze remained fixed on the page, his expression unreadable. That's that, Clem said, his voice carrying the weight of eternity. Let's go, Reggie murmured, the words falling from his lips without thought. They left the newsroom together, arm in arm. The door swung shut behind them with a heavy thud, the sound echoing in the silent room. Outside, the clock in the tower struck 12, its chime hollow and relentless. Inside the now empty newsroom, the crack in the ceiling split wider, a jagged maw that swallowed the dim light, leaving only shadows in its wake. Boyle thought himself untouchably a highwayman, ruling the night with his pistol and wit, but in Black Hollow, the moonlit woods whispered of an older terror. When the ghostly rider of legend appears, Boyle's bravado shatters. Forced to face a spectral foe bound by death and vengeance, Boyle learns that some debts demand more than gold and some roads lead straight to the grave. The wind howled through the skeletal trees, carrying with it a chill that seemed to seep into the soul. Boyle slid a long pistol from his boot, its metallic click unnaturally loud in the stillness. The sound echoed briefly, swallowed by the night's heavy silence. Wrapping his tattered cloak tighter around his gaunt frame, he adjusted the sagging brim of his featherless hat. The cloak's edges whispered against the damp underbrush as he shifted uneasily on his horse. Above, the moon hung pale and sickly, its light casting spectral shadows that danced like ghostly figures on the forest floor. This was no ordinary night. The insects had fallen eerily silent, their absence as unsettling as a scream. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the ears, leaving only the heartbeat to remind one of life. Even the trees seemed alive, their skeletal branches reaching out like bony fingers, eager to snag an unwary traveler. From below, on the winding road that hugged the mountainside like a serpent, came the muffled clatter of approaching hooves. Boyle tensed. His pale lips curved into a cruel smile as the sound grew louder. A coach, its wheels churning the dirt in an urgent rhythm. "Stand and deliver, whelp!" Boyle's voice sliced through the darkness, harsh and demanding. The coach skidded to a halt. The gaunt driver, his face obscured by shadow, reined in the panicked horses. Slowly, a figure emerged, a tall, gray-mustached man, his green coat shimmering faintly in the moonlight. "Sire," the man said, his voice trembling with indignation, "I had heard your kind were more polite." Boyle sneered, waving his pistol lazily. "Politeness is for the righteous, my lord. Now, your valuables quickly." The man reached into the coach and retrieved a small leather pouch, passing it to Boyle with a begrudging scowl. "No jewels?" Boyle demanded, his eyes narrowing. "Traveling at night?" "Certainly not," the man retorted, his tone icy. Boyle leaned closer, his gaze piercing the darkened interior of the coach. "And who's this?" A soft, frightened voice answered before the man could. "Father, is that the ghost they spoke of at the inns? The one who haunts these hills?" A pale face framed by golden hair emerged from the shadows of the coach. The child's blue eyes were wide with terror, her small hand clutching at her father's sleeve. Boyle hesitated, his grip tightening on the pistol. "Peace, child," he said, his voice softening despite himself. "I am no ghost, only a collector of what's owed. But ghosts? No need to fear them. Forget such tales, they'll cloud your pretty face with worry." The man wasted no time. With a sharp command to his coachman, he snapped the door shut, and the coach rattled off into the night. Boyle watched it disappear, the child's frightened eyes lingering in his mind. He spurred his horse forward, uneasy. The girl's words clung to him like cobwebs. He did not believe in ghosts. Yet the air seemed heavier now, charged with an unseen presence. The forest grew denser as he rode, branches clawing at his cloak like desperate hands. The sharp wind bit at his hollow cheeks, its icy fingers probing the spaces between his ribs. He pushed forward, but the familiar path twisted and shifted, leading him astray. He reined in his horse as they stumbled into a clearing bathed in unnatural moonlight. Boyle frowned. This place was unfamiliar, and yet it felt wrong. The silence here was deafening, pressing against his skull like a vice. Ahead, two gnarled trees stood together, their bare branches intertwined. They stretched out like skeletal arms, forming a crude gibbet. Shadows writhed beneath them, cast by the pale moonlight. Boyle's breath hitched as his eyes caught the outline of something swinging shadow, human in shape, swaying gently as though caught in a breeze that didn't exist. The night was alive now, every sound amplified. The distant howl of a wolf, the screech of an owl seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. His horse shuddered beneath him, snorting and stamping its hooves in restless terror. "Steady?" Boyle muttered, though his own voice betrayed him, quivering like a loose string. The shadow swayed again, more deliberately this time. Boyle gripped the reins tighter, his knuckles white. The clearing seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, the air thick with an unspoken threat. "Who's there?" Boyle barked into the void, his voice cracking. Only the echo answered, mocking him. For the first time that night, Boyle felt something he hadn't in years: fear. It curled in his chest like a serpent, squeezing his breath short. He urged his horse to move, but the beast stood frozen, its eyes rolling wildly. The shadow moved again, and this time, Boyle swore he heard the creak of a noose tightening. Boyle's horse reared back violently, snorting and pawing at the air, its eyes rolling with primal terror. The beast's sides heaved, and its bit clattered as it chewed anxiously, sensing something more sinister than the skeletal trees that loomed ahead. Boyle gripped the reins tightly, his heart hammering as cold sweat dripped from his brow. "What is it, Ned?" Boyle whispered, his voice trembling. His horse stilled momentarily, its trembling body leaning into Boyle's will, trusting his judgment despite its instincts. Then it came. "Stand and deliver, sire." The words slithered through the night, soft and eerie, like a breeze dragging a whisper from the depths of a tomb. They carried no malice, yet their hollow tone was weighted with despair and an unnatural authority that froze the blood. Boyle wheeled his horse around, his breath hitching painfully in his chest. In the full pale glow of the moonlight, he saw the specter. A rider astride a snow-white steed stood motionless, as though summoned from the abyss itself. The horse, ghostly yet unnaturally robust, betrayed no sound or movement. Its rider was cloaked in black, his form stiff and unnervingly composed. A mask obscured his face, but what lay beneath was unmistakably a pale, deathly skull, its tight-set jaws holding a grim finality. Wisps of a long-dead mustache clung to the remnants of where lips once were. 2 points of unnatural fire glimmered from the eye slits in the mask, drilling into Boyle's soul. The figure adjusted his cloak, as though his lifeless frame still felt the chill of the night. Boyle's heart sank. He had heard of this ghostly highwayman, a cursed soul condemned to haunt the paths where he once reigned in life before being hanged a century ago. "The ghost," Boyle croaked, his voice cracking. "Number the devil himself." Shaking, Boyle's hand fumbled instinctively for the pistol in his boot. His movements were clumsy, as though the chill in the air had seeped into his bones. The hammer clicked loudly as he cocked the weapon, the sound echoing like a death knell in the suffocating silence. The specter remained unmoved. Clack, click! The pistol roared as Boyle fired directly at the ghost's skull. Smoke curled briefly in the wind, and the sharp report echoed through the clearing. Ned bolted momentarily, but the spectral rider and his steed did not so much as flinch. The phantom's hand moved slowly, wiping the remnants of the smoke from his brow as if swatting away an annoying insect. Boyle stared in disbelief, his trembling hand returning the pistol to his boot. He had never missed a target, living or dead. "Stand and deliver, sire," the specter commanded again, his voice unwavering but laden with an almost sorrowful inevitability. A skeletal hand, white and gleaming in the moonlight, extended toward Boyle. The demand was inescapable. Trembling, Boyle reached for the small leather pouch at his side, holding it out with quivering fingers. The pouch, heavy with his meager spoils, was taken by the spectral hand. The touch of those bony fingers sent a wave of cold that lingered long after they withdrew. "You are at liberty to go," the ghostly rider intoned. "But quickly, sire, quickly." Without a sound, the phantom wheeled his pale steed around. The horse moved swiftly, its hooves eerily silent against the earth. Boyle's wide eyes followed the rider as he vanished into the gloom, his form dissolving as though consumed by the shadows themselves. Boyle sat frozen in the clearing, his breath shallow and uneven. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as he tried to steady himself. His fingers fumbled as he reloaded his pistol, the act mechanical and desperate. The trees around him, so full of menace moments ago, now seemed ordinary, their twisted forms just trees once again. The clearing, however, still felt charged, as though the ghost's presence lingered like a stain on the night. He whispered to his horse, "Come on, Ned. Let's leave this cursed place." Ned hesitated but obeyed, breaking into a cautious trot. Boyle clutched his weapon tightly across his chest, his eyes darting into every shadow. Then he laughed a harsh, ragged sound that betrayed the lingering fear in his heart. "Soft, Ned, good horse. We'll see Mag tonight, eh? Maybe she's made some punch. Not that we've anything to give her that jingles tonight." Boyle's forced laughter echoed briefly in the empty woods before being swallowed by the darkness. As they left the spectral clearing behind, the wind picked up, carrying with it a faint whisper. It was almost too soft to hear, but Boyle caught it nonetheless, a hollow, mournful voice fading into the distance. And though he never looked back, he knew the ghost of Black Hollow would haunt his dreams forever.